My name is Dan Chang, and I've been privileged to be the moderator throughout this Dualogue. So Dualogue is an annual live sharing session in the form of casual dialogue hosted by Collab with the support of School of Architecture and Built Environment, UCSI University. We aim to inspire wonder among architecture students and a greater audience with the thematic dialogues and conversation. In this year of 2021, while it's under lockdown, we hope to break solitude and gather community workers and designers to discuss their community architectural work and practices. With practitioners from different countries, these dialogues expand the discourse of community work deeper into the challenges with a community participation, engagement, and life-building grassroots projects from different places, culture, and backgrounds, leading to how we could design the future for common good. Before I go on any further, if you have any questions throughout this session, please do ask in the comment section and I will make sure to convey them to our speaker later on during our Q&A session. Today, our topic will be on social architecture, empowering people with life building, and we are fortunate to have two speakers with us today, and they are both professionals in their field of work. So yeah, we have an interesting dialogue ahead of us, and we hope you to stay with us until the end. Without further ado, allow me to introduce our first speaker of today, Juan Cuevas Duran, co-founder of eStudio Cabernet. Here's a short biography of Juan. So, it's initiated during Juan's Master in Architecture in the Polytechnic University of Madrid. A strong interest in relation of nature and architecture has conducted his work over the recent years in Asia. The exploration of this field is addressed mainly through two disparate approaches: generative design with the aid of parametric tools and direct experimentation with natural and alternative materials. While working on larger teams in China and Hong Kong, Juan's focus was on operating with parametric tools to generate structures, as well as passive solar protection solution for large-scale projects. Inspired by the surrounding vernacular architecture in Southeast Asia from 2016, the research is carried through direct experimentation with natural and alternative materials. Complementing the social aspect, eStudio Cabernet operates as a platform where to test experimental design methods and alternative construction techniques. Since January 2021, Juan has been working as an adjunct professor in INDA, International Design Architecture Program at Chulalongkorn University of Bangkok. This academic platform also offers the opportunity to develop community projects throughout the design and build workshops. So let's put our hands together for Juan Cuevas Duran.
So first of all, thank you very much for organizing this dialogues, these collaboration sessions. I think it's great to try to promote this kind of architecture, and it brings us small studios like ours the opportunity to broadcast a little bit what we are doing in this remote part of Asia. So, as the introduction said, I'm Juan Cuevas. I'm the co-founder of Estudio Cabernet, which is a design and build organization which operates in Southeast Asia. We're based in Mae Sot, which is a small town in the Thai-Myanmar border. Estudio Cabernet was founded with the idea of providing design and construction solutions to underprivileged communities and to irregular settlements that we can find all along the border. In the last years, we have had the chance to study, to research, and also to build and to design and build for this kind of environment, which has been a pleasure and, of course, a huge challenge for us. Today, I'm going to use the Green Island Community Center project to describe a little bit what we consider an ideal process in the scale that we work. But before that, I think it's super important to briefly describe the situation, which actually is the main reason why we are based in Mae Sot, Thailand. So a little bit of context, very briefly, because I know we have a time limit. But basically, Myanmar has in 1948, Myanmar internal conflict started. Is still ongoing nowadays, so it's considered the longest ongoing civil war. The initial goal I'm going to be focusing on the current state, which is the one that concerns us for this talk, because as you can see in the map, we also have Bangladesh, India, China, but I'm going to be mainly focusing on this part of the map, which is Kaya and Kayin state, which we call in English current state sometimes. After a few years, so in 1976, the demands from the Karen people changed, and they requested just to create a federal state in which they could have their own autonomy while belonging to Myanmar. All of that was also denied, and in 2015 there was some ceasefire signed off, which had questionable results, and at the moment the situation has worsened. As many of you know, if you follow the news, in 2021 there was a coup a few months ago, which like kind of restarted these conflicts. So at the moment, unfortunately, it has been quite a bad year for not only for Karen but for all the minorities in Karen state. I mean, all the minorities in Myanmar. Here we see the Moi River, which is like the natural division in between Thailand and Myanmar in the area that we're going to be talking about today. And it's important to understand. I'm almost oversimplifying the situation, but basically the result of this armed conflict is a lot of displaced citizens. And we can classify them basically in three different categories. The first one would be people that is settled in Myanmar, what is considered Myanmar, what they consider Karen state. The second one would be people legally or illegally living in neighboring countries. In our case, we're focusing on Thailand. And the third case would be the refugee camps. The refugee camps are established initially with the premise of providing a shelter, providing a safe space for people that has run away from their homes, and it's meant to be a temporary solution. So that's the way that this infrastructure is built and planned. It's a temporary solution, and after 1-2 years, people are supposed to go back. Unfortunately, the situation has not been like that. What we see in the photos is Mela Camp, which is currently the biggest camp along the border. It was founded in 1984, and far from having less people nowadays, it has been growing constantly. So this camp has something that is actually quite interesting. It offers education, not only for the people living, not for kids living inside of this camp, but also for people living in the surroundings. So some people have a card that allows them to enter on a daily basis so they can get education. So there is some positive sides about having a long-term camp, but of course the negative sides, the downsides are much bigger. Mela Camp is situated around 40 kilometers north of Mysore, so here we can see clearly where we are located. And I think with this, I'm going to finalize the context and try and jump to what we consider as a studio and an ideal process, which doesn't mean that we always achieve it, but it's what we are trying to achieve every time we start a process. So basically the key word here, I'm probably going to be repeating it a little bit too much, is ownership. The only way we can consider that a project is successful is if the community has a sense of ownership with the infrastructure that we provide. And there are many ways, even though there is not a specific recipe which we can consider final, there are many ways of trying to achieve this. In my opinion and my team's opinion, we have to consider that fact in every single step of what we consider a complete project, right? So the first step would be, of course, project scouting and funding, meeting with the community and authorities to make sure that the project can go on, can happen. Design and material sourcing, then we gather a construction team, and when we finish, we try to always monitor the process, monitor what is happening on our buildings after we leave, not only to know that they are doing all right and fix problems if there are, but also to learn from our mistakes, which of course happen more often than we would like. So I'm going to, as I said, use Green Island Community Center because it's the project that we consider to be the most successful in terms of process. It basically we can check all the boxes that we put to ourselves. The first step is as a general approach. Scouting is a really tricky situation because that's where the project starts. Is Studio Cabernet only gets involved if we know that in the future, after we finish, there's going to be a continuity of the program that happens inside. This means that we don't accept projects we don't propose projects. This is the first time in Green Island that we proposed an infrastructure without the local community requesting it. The main reason why we did so is because here in the photo we see the construction team. We started working in 2016, and the main construction team was mostly formed from Karen and Burmese refugees or migrants that lived on one specific community. The people living in this community focused mostly on one kind of job, which was collecting plastic during the day. And after a few hours of hard work, as you can see in the photo, they would sell it to a recycling plant, which is partially belongs to the Thai government, and they could make 2 or 3 euros, of course, very little money, in exchange for the plastic they produce. This meant that we were in close contact with this community, and we did see that it had a need of an infrastructure, especially for younger people. But as I said before, we tried not to propose, never tried to propose a project by ourselves. So what we did in this case is work together with Play On Site, which is an organization that uses the power, that empowers people through basically sports. So it's focused on gender equality and empowerment, and through the use of sports, mostly football, they run different programs in different locations. This meant that they did have the infrastructure to fill our building, let's say, to give a meaning to our building. We didn't want to just propose a space for people to gather, but we want to make sure that in the future there is, for example, classes, not only football, but also like some extracurricular activities happening. This is the first step, which is scouting and funding. In this case, it was funded through a multinational company in Europe, which maybe is not very important, but that it was Play On Site, the one who managed all of this. I'm going to summarize this because it will take too long, but basically, we decide the program with community meetings, not only in Green Island, but every time we decide what material to use depending on the context. This is obvious, but sometimes in contemporary architecture, not so obvious. We use raw earth, adobe bricks, teak, bamboo, and touch. And then we have our own tools as designers, architects, and engineers, which usually include models, axonometric drawings that we use to communicate with the workers. This means that most of the times a 2D drawing or a section is too complex for somebody without training to understand. So we try to be quite very physical. And also axonometric drawings or renderings work very well because we believe that the construction worker, when he knows where he's aiming, where he's going, is more confident and we get better results. So very quickly, this is the location where we are focused, where our site is. This is my site, and Myanmar would be around here, a few kilometers away from this site. Here we see a close-up photo. The step number one, as I mentioned on my summary, it would be like meeting with the community. So with the idea in mind of using sports as an empowerment tool, we had several meetings with the community, some of them more official than others. Also the community surveys in which we ask them what do they miss in their village. You can call it a village, an irregular settlement. It's difficult to classify, but basically many of the requests were cane ball, which is like football, and an enclosed space or a covered space where they could teach the kids or even use it just as a place where people could get together. The football field, as we see in the plan, is the main core, and then we have the building here, the community center here, bleachers, a covered space. We have a playground here, number 4. And we have a food and vegetable, a food garden on the axis. This photo was taken before the end of construction, where we can see a little bit how everything was cleaned up, and we started with the construction of the football field because we believed that we wanted to create an interest before even having a building. We wanted to create a place where kids would gather already. So. During the design process, something that we do consider a lot, and I think is crucial for the scale that we work, it's the kind of materials. Sorry, I'm taking the time to make sure. The kind of materials we use. Thailand has very strict regulations when it comes to using new timber. So that also is great because it protects the environment, but it creates a big challenge, which is you cannot really find. It's not very accessible. And what we always do is use timber that comes from old dismantled house, and we can see in the left, instead of being put down, the houses are slowly dismantled, and every single piece of wood is classified and goes to the second-hand market. Apart from that, we use regularly betel nut tree, second quality wood, which could be eucalyptus, for example, and obviously bamboo, which is one of the most, as everybody knows, probably attending this Dualogue. bamboo, which is one of the most sustainable materials if used properly. So one of the main difficulties that we challenge is gathering a new and different construction team every time we do a project. This means that as a core, we have a few construction workers that are always with us, and they are experienced and skilled. And we always try to hire people from the community we build in order to make sure that the building will be repaired when we finish construction. This means that we're trying to use the same techniques as the villagers know about. Apart from having workers, sometimes we count with the collaboration of the community members. Like in this photo, we see, for example, this is the first stage. As I was saying, we're building a football ground. We're using a French drainage system to try to get rid of the exceeding water during the rainy season. In this case, we have women and kids that are basically volunteers for the task. So instead of basically renting a machine, what we do is communicate with the villagers, let them know that there is something happening, which also happened during the meetings in which we were asking what they want. And this works in our favor because at this stage everybody knows that there is something happening, and everybody knows that it's going to be a public space that everyone can use. Here we see another photo. A fun fact is that we did publish this photo, not us but Play On Site, and it was problematic because the company that was supporting the project basically really rejected this kind of attitude from us because they thought that we were promoting somehow child labor. And we do understand that this kind of confusion can happen. The funny thing is that it's the opposite of that. Like, the kids are so excited about having a football ground that they are collaborating. Of course, they want to be grown ups and they want to work with the construction workers. So in our experience, it's something very positive to get people involved from the really very beginning. Here I'm not going to talk much about architecture because when it comes to community, I think that the most important part, of course, is the people that we're working for. But to summarize very quickly what the strategy of this community center, we raise the building from the ground because these areas sometimes get flooded during the monsoon season, and we have a timber structure which is connected with a double steel profile here. To very light foundations. So basically the building would stand by itself and the foundations are just to make sure that it doesn't move. Here we see a slightly more detailed diagram of the main parts of the building. We have a structure that supports a floor. Again, this floor is upcycled or recycled teak. We have a teak frame, and then we have a roof that I will show later that is a bit more complex than just thatch roof. Here we see the initial pyramid, which is the way we start, and you see how instead of having machinery, we're just stacking scaffoldings and trying to reach that crown piece that connects everything. Here is the crown piece, which we would consider is the only somehow technical part of, not technical, but maybe not so low tech as the rest of the building, because we always, as I said, try to use like very low tech systems, and in this case, of our crown. Here we see the finalized timber structure, which will support the roof. When it comes to the roof, this is something that we do in many of our projects. Is instead of only having thatch roof, which actually looks great from inside outside and is permeable somehow, so the building breathes. We found our experience. Based on our experience, we thought that it was better to have a triple layer roof. In this case, we have an inner layer of aluminum zinc, so a common metal sheet, a common tin roof sheet. Then we have a layer of eucalyptus trunks or eucalyptus branches, which creates an air chamber in between the inner and the outer layer. And outside we have a thatch, in this case it's sugarcane thatch roof that protects from direct radiation. What we try to achieve with this, or what this achieves, is a cooler inside. Basically, like the inertia is bigger and it takes longer for the building to get heat up. Here we see a little detail of this, before finishing, a little detail of the foundation pieces and the crown. One of the main ideas is to create a centralized space that attracts people. During this construction, we were lucky enough, or we were fortunate. Fortunately, there was some change of planning in another area of this community, which is unofficially called Dumpsite community. And many of the houses that we see here up north, and some of them more to the right-hand side, had to be relocated. I mean, this is the relocation area. So for some reason, the villagers decided to build their houses around the football field, which actually played in our advantage because at that stage, everybody knew about the project, everybody was involved, and there was not only one construction happening, ours, but also villagers. So we were sharing tools, we're having a very collaborative environment. As I was explaining before, we don't consider the project finished once we take our photos and then we leave. But it's super important for us to make sure that the program that we are aiming is implemented, and we want to make sure that the building is going to be maintained. The way we try to achieve this is by collaborating intensively, I would say, with other organizations. So Studio Cavernas can be considered, we can consider we operate totally independent, but also always through collaboration. So this means from the scouting to selecting the workers to deciding what program goes inside always happens through bigger organizations, or not bigger necessarily, but organizations that are specialized on specific things. So we are considered, I mean, we are a very small studio and we're focused on design and construction, and that's our expertise. So we try not to make too many decisions that are out of our expertise field. This means that that in this case, we know for sure that Play-On-Site will take care of the program, which is basically the kids are learning Thai and they're learning English, and we make sure that the football field will be maintained because they're also having like regular football trainings. This means that when we finish the construction, the first thing we usually do is an opening ceremony in which everyone from the community is invited. In this case, the kids are the one who showed more interest, of course, but the space is planned to not only provide a space for the kids, but also for the parents, and also make sure that the parents are, let's say, part of the project, because when they go to work, they basically drop the kids here, drop the younger members of the community here, and they know that they are somehow on a protected space. Here is part of the program implementation. As I said, they're very informal, but at the same time, the parents are very happy because the kids have something to do after school, which in Thailand usually finishes around 3 p.m. And then after that, parents are usually not home and the kids don't have anything to do. So having some football, having some classes, it's always helpful. Not only that, but now after 1-2 years, we're still in close contact with this organization, and they send us regularly pictures to know what's happening. In this case, they have some meditation, as you see on the image on the right. They have some, on Fridays, they have some cinema night, and the building is very active. Not only that, but actually the project has been well maintained and upgraded somehow. So the food garden grew naturally because it was well planned, not by us, but through a collaboration also. But lately they have been also planting trees. At the moment, the community is obviously suffering the lockdown that we are all suffering in Thailand, but even a harsher one. This is a very specific, very marginalized, it's an stigmatized place, and we can be happy that at least they have a place in which they are still gathering, according to our informants. And just to finalize, I want to emphasize one more time. I said it before, I would repeat it many times. Ownership, we think, is super important. Basically, we don't want villagers to see this as an alien, that some foreigners came here and they built in 2 months, but we want to make sure that they participate from deciding what's going to be in their land to participating in doing construction, skilled and unskilled. Some people getting training during construction, and then allowing them to use the building the way they want. That's why we find it super important for them to have a say during the design, because it will be the only way. Basically, the building is for them. It's a public infrastructure that is unregulated. Basically, anybody can do whatever they want, and we want to make sure that it's used the proper way. And the only way to ensure that is knowing that the community is basically satisfied with our project. So this is the end for my presentation. Thank you so much for this short 25 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's a very interesting project. I like how you actually run the construction process that involve the local villagers and the community, and how you actually erect the play space before the buildings is actually erected. It's very refreshing to see this. All right, so up next, we have Joshua Pisley, the co-founder of Cauldron Studio, as our second speaker. And here's a short biography of Josh. So Josh co-founded Cauldron Studio during his second year of university studying architecture, and his role within the business lies within project management, people management, and construction procurement. His passion for construction management developed while he's working under a practice in Manchester, where he managed a wide range of projects, including large-scale residential and industrial schemes. His skill ensured that the project runs smoothly from start to finish, overcoming supplies and logistic issues with quick thinking and well-action plans. Upon finishing university, Joshua was the chair of the annual exhibition, leading a team of over 40 people to curate and display the school's work. He has lectured at universities across the UK and has pitched Cauldron Studio at multiple events with thousands of audience. So now, let's put our hands together for our second speaker, Joshua PC from Cauldron Studio.
Brilliant. Thanks for that introduction. So thanks for the introduction. I'm going to talk briefly about what Cauldron Studio is and what we do, and then talk about one of our recently completed projects, the Ranwas School located in Vanuatu, and some of the kind of challenges that project overcame. So yeah, we're Cauldron Studio. We're a collective of architectural designers that are working on design and build community projects all over the world. So to date, we've worked on more than 30 projects in 12 countries across 4 continents. So our kind of ethos or method statement, or mission, if you like, is democratic education, quality design that's accessible to all. So we really believe that every human being should have the opportunity and tools to shape the spaces they inhabit, and that we should all benefit from the quality of life that's achieved through informed design. And then finally, that construction has to reduce its environmental impact on our planet. And we try to facilitate this mission statement through 3 kind of key pillars within our work. So the first of which is designing through collaboration. So by that, we mean working with every stakeholder involved in the project right from the very onset, bringing in everyone's kind of key values and maximizing them to create a greater ownership over the project. And that's especially true when it comes to the end users or the community we're working with, through their involvement in the brief making process and all the way through the design process, and then eventually on site. It helps us to gain that kind of ownership over the project and kind of further empowers the community to then look after the building and use it and love it after we've left. So the second of which is learn through building. It kind of does what it says on the tin. It's getting on site, getting your hands dirty and getting stuck in on the tools and in construction. And as architects, we found that, the process of building and learning through building is an absolutely invaluable skill to have. It helps us to transfer and design better, transfer our knowledge and design better, through learning how we draw a line on a piece of paper to then actually physically putting it together on site. So it's something that we believe everyone should be involved in, but it's also an opportunity to educate and upskill local people to provide future kind of employability and future career options. And then finally, experience through immersion. So by this, we mean that on almost all of our projects, we are living and working alongside the community for which we're building. So that helps us to gain a really deep understanding of the local context and local culture and the way in which the end users kind of interact with their spaces, which means that in future, we can kind of design better spaces for them with that really kind of deep understanding. And again, that helps to further with the ownership of the building and that kind of exchange of culture and knowledge. It's an amazing melting pot of kind of people and skills on projects. So the Ranwas School, this was a project that we completed back in 2019 now, which was one of the most recently completed buildings. Obviously, coronavirus and the pandemic has meant that a lot of our international work has had to kind of pause for the time being, but we're still working on lots of great projects and hope to return to them soon. But this project specifically came about when a charity called the Tambok Project, visited Vanuatu following Cyclone Pam in 2015, which was at the time one of the most devastating cyclones that the South Pacific had ever seen. Unfortunately, that's been preceded by a further 2 very devastating cyclones more recently in 2019 and 2020. But in their kind of post-disaster evaluation, the charity kind of identified a load of villages and kind of towns across the island which had damaged infrastructure, damaged homes, etc., and did a really massive kind of needs assessment. And they identified Ranwas Village as a particularly important one, in which the school had been completely destroyed. You know, they'd kind of identified the project as being, or the location as being, at risk of future natural disasters due to its kind of exposed location on the side of the kind of mountain or hilltop. But they also found this really interesting issue that the school had been having before the building was destroyed in the cyclone. And that was that because of the elevation at which the site or the school sits on the mountain, they have a really high humidity all year round. And that meant that all of the books in the classroom were constantly getting moist from the condensation. And it meant that they would deteriorate very quickly and the kids wouldn't be able to use them and use the learning materials. So the charity prior to that had been sending out lots of books and lots of learning materials and were constantly having to replace them because of this kind of unique moisture climatic issue. So we were approached to kind of come on board and try and come up with a design solution for the project that hopefully overcame this moisture issue, but also you know, provided a building that was building back stronger, could maybe stand up to future natural disasters, and would create more employment opportunities for the local community and local people. So here's kind of some of the 6 key stakeholders that were involved in the project. First of which obviously was the local community, Ramwas Village. The second, the NGO, as I've mentioned before, the Tambok Project. That's a UK-based NGO, but that has been working in Vanuatu for, I think, over 10 years now, and have spent a lot of time living and working there. International participants, so these are architecture students or engineering students or just generally design students that come away with us on our projects to get involved in the construction side of things and to learn through building, as we've said before, as an opportunity to gain kind of education through that process. We then got local skilled workers, so people from either Ramwas Village or some of the local communities who are highly trained in skills like carpentry, welding, that sort of thing. And they really act as a pillar in construction to educate both the international participants that are coming away, but also unskilled members of the local community. So they're kind of our go-between and our masters of education who can help teach everyone in construction and hopefully, as I've said before, further that employability and upskill people in the local community. We then got UK-based sponsors and donors. So this was both engineering firms, environmental design firms, and other kind of sponsors of the project. So we worked with Cardiff University and the environmental design specialists there to come up with a design solution that hopefully kind of overcomes this moisture issue that I've spoken about. And then finally, us as the kind of architect or facilitator, making sure that all the stakeholders are inputting and benefiting equally from the process and trying to maximize the value that each stakeholder can bring. So I'm just going to run through some of the kind of key design considerations that we face on all of our projects, but kind of reference them back specifically to the Ramwas school. So the first of which is information, or rather lack of. Often when we're going to very remote locations and we're working with charities, there's not enough budget or time to be able to visit the sites and do a proper site survey and appraisal. So it means that often we're designing from digital materials, so things like Google Earth, which you can see here, trying to get an idea of the topography, elevation, and surrounding context. So when we're designing, that means we have to design quite flexibly. You know, when we get on site, it might be there are unforeseen circumstances, like the level change was actually different to the way we predicted, or in the photos that we've been sent by the local community or the NGO, there was kind of some elements that they'd missed out on the photographs. So our designs have to be flexible to cater for that so that we can adapt very quickly once we're on site. The next of which is community engagement. So making sure that throughout the entire process, we're looking for ways in which we can continually engage the community. So that's you know, through design workshops. Obviously, because we're remote, it's then facilitating them through the NGO or the local contact, asking kind of questionnaires and running these kind of informal design workshops to tease out different ideas and concepts from the community to really understand what they need from their space and how they wish to use it and what their kind of aspirations for the space are. The next of which is budget. I mean, this one's obviously quite, fairly obvious one, especially when we're working with charities. It's often a very limited funding pot, which means that, it's kind of a red line budget. There's no opportunity to go back to them and say, look, we're halfway through the build and we've run out of money. Can we have some more? So when we're designing, that means that we have to really take account of every last nail, screw, bit of timber that goes into the project and make sure that we're counting this as accurately as possible, but also make sure that we're maximizing the value of every element of the design. So if there is, if we need to build a bookshelf, then maybe we can give it two functions and it can be a bookshelf that's also a door. And that means we're kind of saving resource and maximizing the value of the project to make sure we never hit that red line or kind of empty the funding pot. The next of which is materials. So as you can see here, this was probably about 10-20-minute walk from site. The community had a really great natural resource of sand and aggregate, which could be used for the foundations. But it's really important that when we're designing, we're only specifying locally available materials. And that is for two reasons. Firstly, it means that the embodied energy that goes into the building and the materials is kept lower. If they're sourced very locally to site, then there aren't massive carbon costs in kind of transporting them. But also it means that when we're kind of designing and using local materials, it's more likely that the local community are then going to adopt those design methods that we've kind of put in place to build back future buildings better and stronger than if we specify, materials that have to be imported or are very expensive. They'll never be used again in future buildings. So by taking those natural local materials and kind of trying to push them through design and structural methods, we hope that, through the involvement of the community in the project, that they'll then adopt some of those methods and build better spaces because of it in future. So the next of which is climate. Obviously, I've mentioned in this project, we had a very interesting climatic condition with the humidity that ruined the books, but also in the kind of cyclones, which are kind of, increasing in severity and frequency at the moment. So the task was to kind of come up with a design that could hopefully withstand future cyclones and overcome that moisture issue. But obviously, when we're building in other locations over the world, the climate conditions that we're working towards are completely different. It might be hurricanes in one location or earthquakes in another or flash floods in another. So it's making sure that we're working with those environmental design specialists to make sure we can kind of come up with a design that maximizes the reduction of some of those issues. Access, this one's definitely key on some of our most remote projects and was definitely key on this project. Often with really remote sites, a lot of the issue with getting building done is that it's really hard to get materials to the site. With Ranwa School, what we had to do was purchase some materials from the mainland. They were then shipped across to this island here, and then spent, I think, about a 6-hour journey on the back of a pickup truck to get to the site. And that's, not a 6-hour journey because it's a really long way. It's actually a very short way, but because the roads are so treacherous, it takes a lot of time to kind of get to the village. But also means that, we really have to factor in the amount of journeys we have to do back and forth with the materials because the trucks can only carry so much weight. And that really affects the budget. So this is a key consideration that we have to try and plan in for right at the start of a project. Again, equipment, especially when we're working in remote locations like Ranwa School here, it's not the case that we can just get a crane or a digger or a forklift onto site. These are obviously very heavy plant and machinery that just would never be able to access a site like this. So we have to come up with innovative ways to try and lift heavy objects, like in this case, lifting the frames through a series of tension ropes and a lot of people power. And trying to do that in a way that kind of is as safe as possible with the resources that we have and the time that we have available to us. So often it produces some really kind of innovative ways to tackle some of these construction issues on site. The next is which is skill level. Often, we're working in places where construction skills aren't super prevalent or are quite basic. And obviously through the construction of the project, we hope to upskill local people and teach new construction methods. But it does mean that when we design buildings, they have to be fairly simple and repetitive. In the Ramwas school example, the structure was built out of a series of portal frames, and that meant that once everyone in the construction team had learned how to build one, it was just a case of replicating that kind of 10, 15 times over. And the kind of learning curve and learning process, once you've slowly understood how to build one, is very rapid. And suddenly it takes a whole day or 2 days to build one frame, and then in the space of another day or another 2 days, you've managed to build another 15. So it's a really quick learning process, but helps that the buildings are kind of repetitive in their design methodology. Time. So often on our projects, we're building to quite tight time schedules. Either that's because funding that was received to build the project has certain deadlines by which it has to be spent, or that to keep costs down, we need to minimize the time we spend on site to help maximize the kind of budget towards materials. So when we're designing, we have to kind of think of different ways in which we can get as many things going on site at one time. So in this example, it meant that we were building the frames and kind of prefabricating the frames on one part of site, whilst we had another team digging, laying and setting out the foundations on another part of site. And that's a very quick way to build. And it means that during, usually halfway along the construction timeline, all the frames are built, all of the foundations are set and laid, and it all comes together, and suddenly you've got a building frame out of nowhere. So it's quite a quick way to build. So obviously our objectives in projects is to maximize impact as much as possible. And we believe that that needs to be done both in the delivery of the actual building, but also through the process of procuring that building. So throughout all of the design phases and throughout the construction, there's as much opportunity for impact there as there is with the kind of finished product or end building. So one of those kind of key ways to maximize our impacts is quality education. So designing spaces that can help further education and enhance the teaching of kids that are learning in them. So obviously with Ramwas School, it was trying to create a space that creates, it's well lit, naturally ventilated, a comfortable space to be in, and kind of helps to inspire kids to learn and attend school. And since completing the building, we've been told that a number of kids from neighbouring villages have also started to attend the school because of the building, and also that Dennington here in this photo has said that he wants to become a teacher so that one day he can teach in the Ramwas School as well. So that's really great to see. So another impact point is knowledge exchange. So trying to find as many ways, both off-site before in the design phases and on-site, in which we can kind of exchange knowledge. So either by teaching design skills or learning construction skills. And this is probably one of the most powerful ways to create an impact, through education and upskilling people. But we're learning as much as the local community we're working with is learning about kind of local construction techniques, local materials, and local kind of cultural contexts. So it's a really lovely kind of melting pot of ideas and exchange of knowledge on site. So then gender equality. Often in a lot of the places we're working, women in the construction industry is a bit of a taboo, or it's not a very common sight. So we feel that it's important to lead by example and encourage women in the local community to get stuck in on site, and that by getting hands-on and showing that they're just as capable as the men that are working on site, we hope to kind of change some of those perceptions and maybe open up careers for some of the local women in construction in the future. As well as the international participants that come away on our projects are usually kind of 70 to 80% of our team is female. And again, that helps to lead by example and show that, construction isn't just a career for men. It's something that's open to women as well. Increase employability. So obviously through, procurement of our projects, we're providing jobs to the local community. As I said before, employing those skilled workers, but also employing unskilled workers within the local community to give them a chance to earn a living, but also gain those skills whilst on site. and create a kind of sustainable income for the local community for a period of time. So the next, which is the climate crisis, obviously something that's very relevant at the moment, and through trying to specify entirely local materials, as I've said before, materials that are as local to the site as possible carry a lower embodied energy, but also trying to design in ways which reduces the amount of concrete in our builds, but still maintains those kind of structural standards, and using kind of natural materials such as bamboo here and weaving them into the building to kind of reduce the building's kind of carbon footprint, which is super important, and we think should be applied to any project anywhere. And then finally, it's talking about the ongoing evaluation of projects. I think we definitely feel that impact doesn't necessarily stop once we leave site and finish a building. It's equally important to continue to evaluate the projects and understand how the community is using a space, so that in future, when we continue to work in these locations, we can design better and understand and take learnings from previous buildings to then keep furthering and keep progressing on future designs. So with the Ranwas School specifically, obviously one of our main aims was to try and overcome the moisture issue. So since we've completed the building, we've got some monitoring equipment in the library space and in the school space to understand how the building's performing. And since completion, we've seen a reduction in about 20% of the relative humidity in the library space compared to the rest of the school spaces. So that's really great to see, and is something that we'll hope to build upon and get that figure even lower in future. So yeah, thanks for listening. Our Instagram is @CaulkinStudio if you want to keep up to date with our work and want to kind of see what else we're up to. So yeah, take a look there, and thanks for listening.
Before we move on to our next session, I would also like to introduce our Guidebook project to you. So this year, we are aiming to produce a comprehensive research-based guidebook for community architecture, and this book will take a deeper dive into the issues and challenges faced by the community architecture projects across different countries and construct a clear reflections of the problems and errors, as well as the strengths and learning outcomes respectively. So of course, none of this will be easy without the generous support from all of you. So I would like to raise crowdfunding here to make this project a success. So we would like to greatly appreciate if you could contribute any amount to our team. And if you wish to support us, please contact our UCSIW Facebook page or simply click the link below for further details. On behalf of our team, we would like to thank you in advance for your contribution. And next, we'll move on to our Q&A session. So there's another one from Ong Wuhan. So yeah, what are the strategy and that you use to get all the stakeholders come at once to complete the project? So is there any specific strategy that you use when you are working with the community?
Yeah, I mean, for us, obviously, we have quite a lot of stakeholders that take part in a project from, as I mentioned, like the community at the core of it, of course, an NGO or client, project sponsors, design professionals, and they're also all from all over the world. So, they're never all on site at any one time, and even some of them will never visit the site. So I think the key for bringing everyone together and working towards a project is communication, trying to make sure that everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what's going on. And I think to that end as well, transparency, if things start to go wrong, making sure that everyone understands what the issue is and that we can then all come together collectively to kind of overcome that. And obviously recently the pandemic, I suppose, in a way has helped with digital collaboration, and people are definitely more open to, working together across countries and continents through Zoom and platforms like this. So in some ways that has helped things.
How about Juan? What's your approach on this? Thank you. Thank you, Josh, for sharing.
I think, as Joshua said, I think in our case, we work in a very small scale and we try to keep it very under control. So Zoom is kind of a new thing for us in the last 2-3 years, but we have tried to minimize the amount of people participating in the design. I mean, always reaching out, but people like locally based. So transparency is the one that I could say that I think is, if you're not transparent, you could face a huge problem with the community, especially. So we have never had to hide anything, which some people recommended us to not say that it's going to be delayed or it's going to be over the budget. And we have been always upfront. So sometimes you get yelled at for no reason, but at the same time, you're not going to be in trouble in the future. So transparency.
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, I'll also show another question coming from Min Zhongyang. So yeah, how can we actually stimulate the interest of community members and let them participate in the live build, especially when they are not so proactive? Is there any tips? Especially I think like international participants, like for example for Cauldron, how do you actually assemble all these people together to build the project? Yeah, maybe Josh, you can share first.
Yeah, so I mean, with the community, I think one of the key things for us in getting everyone on board and in the loop is by identifying early on in the process, either with the NGO we're working with or by being there in person, who the kind of key members within the community are and who are the kind of figureheads within the community that have the trust of the rest of the community, and then relaying information through them. Obviously, if it's coming from us, then sometimes there might be, it might not be trusted, or there might be questions around it. Whereas if it's understood first by the kind of figurehead in the local community and then relayed to the remainder of the community, it means that people are, can understand it better and, usually buy into it better as well. So that kind of on the ground contact is a really important person to get right. And then with international participants, we just we basically have application forms on our website to join on our various projects under our Join Us page. And yeah, we kind of just have connections in a lot of universities across the world, and people can kind of go on our website and find our projects and then sign up there and kind of join us on the site.
Thank you. So how about Juan? What's your take on this?
When it comes to the community members, I agree that basically it's better to rely on someone that is already trusted and not try to create a new relationship. But then when it comes to, if I read the first part of the question, to stimulate the interest of people, maybe it doesn't sound so good, but money, if you want to teach somebody how to do round earth, as I was saying before, or how to put a roof together, some people suggested to just have volunteers from the community helping us, and that works for kids and sometimes for women that are going to spend 2 hours. But the way we approach it is by paying people under training circumstances, paying them almost as much as a professional skilled worker. So the way we try to make sure that they get, number one is offering a skill that is useful for them in the future, and number two, making sure that for us it's beautiful when we volunteer, imagine as architecture students, and we pay our own trip to go to the other side of the world. But of course, for somebody from a very disadvantaged community, he cannot afford to spend 1 week learning how to work with wood unless it's useful for him in the future, and unless he's getting paid enough to survive that week, because they really work. They really depend on the weekly wage, right? So I know this is not very idealistic. That's not a pretty answer, but I think useful skills and a little bit of money incentivization, and then internationally we just get sometimes curriculums from people who wants to participate, and we don't demand too much. We prefer older people sometimes, but now, after seeing Cooking Studio starting second year, I think it's a mistake.
Thank you very much for sharing this. So yeah, I'll move on to next question, which is from architect Huat Lim. So how do you fund project and structure the beneficiaries? Is resilience not the issue, rather sustainability strategy? Yeah.
For us, the projects are funded, from massive varying sources. Often that's not our responsibility. Obviously, architects and designers and project managers, not financiers or funders. So basically the partner organization, be that an NGO or a company that we're working for, they're the ones responsible for funding it. Often it is through donations or grants. And obviously sometimes we'll do kind of drawings or visuals that help with funding applications to get them kind of over the line or to get more funding. But it's something that we don't typically, we typically shy away from ourselves. And that's, when we very first started, we were funding projects ourselves, but because the projects we were funding then were like playgrounds and they were really, very low cost, it was a lot easier to fundraise. So we did things like Kickstarter campaigns to raise those funds. But as the buildings grew in kind of size and complexity, we kind of shifted away from that being our responsibility, because there's just no way we'd be able to, generate that much funding. So it's, now it's like a balance of trying to find organizations out there that have the funding already in place, but don't necessarily have the means to, to develop these projects, or finding charities that have a little bit of funding in the pot, but not the full amount, and then working with them to hopefully kind of, design projects and create a buzz around the projects to gain more funding, and then hopefully get them off the ground eventually.
Thank you. So how about Juan? Do you have any problems that you face in the funding for projects as well?
No, my reply is almost identical. It's almost identical. We did try to fundraise, and we quickly realized that it's not our expertise, and it's beautiful in the beginning to be able to control that process, but it doesn't, in our opinion, it doesn't make sense anymore, because it's a full-time job if you want to do it properly. So we just collaborate with people that has expertise on that. I don't understand the second part of the question. Like, is resilience not the issue rather than sustainable strategy?
I believe, Harling, you're watching the show right now. Can you elaborate more on this question, or I move on to your next question? So here's another question. Do you both feel like our typologies are not emergent category of use of buildings and their capacity to modulate and respond effectively to change, not only climatically, but also to serve the community needs? Example, clean water and recycling building material. So should we want to start first?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah. Okay, I think what he meant was like, let's say the typology of the building. Maybe like from Josh, yours is like a school, and for one is like a community center. So I think what he meant is that the category of use of building, maybe that it will be more effective to actually give impact to the community if like the building actually serve, let's say, clean water to the rural areas where they can benefit directly from the building. I guess that's what he meant.
Right, okay. So yeah, I mean, like trying to get as much value out of the building as possible. Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously in as many projects as we can, we try to implement things like water collection, recycling, use of building materials, etc. And it's just, making sure we're doing it responsibly and in a way that enhances the building and sticks to the budget. Obviously, if we're tasked with designing a school, then the first thing we need to do is design an appropriate classroom and school space to fit the brief. And then if there's opportunity then to use that design to collect water or to kind of use recycled building materials or even naturally sustainable materials, then we'll obviously put that in as many occasions and situations as we can. Obviously, when charities have limited funding pots, they want to get as much out of the building as possible. So yeah, trying to find as many ways to add value through the design as possible is a key.
we've done a lot of, well, we can call it engineering work, which was related to water and sanitation. It's not very pretty. I mean, I worked together with an engineer. Usually we are two. I mean, the architect is the engineer, and he loves that kind of toilet, like the toilet project. I personally think that I cannot contribute as much as I would like to, right? Because water is just like, it's about physics, and it's not so much about design. So you can make it better, but yeah, it depends on the kind of project that you get involved. And usually, like, if you can do some water collection, is great. If you can add something, is great. Like in this case, in Green Island, we had to build a road to be able to access, for the trucks to bring gravel, the gravel that we saw the kids spreading. So we try to improve the infrastructure as much as possible. And we do know that, of course, sanitation and water supply is number one. And if we don't have that, there is no point on maybe having a community center, right? So I think I understand the question like that. And the reply is like, yeah, we've done a lot of dirty work, but we don't publish it as much, or we don't publicize it as much.
Yeah, usually we only focus on the programmatic approach, right? Because there's a space quality over there. So yeah, so far there's the questions coming from our viewers. So yeah, I would also like some questions from my part. So in your opinion, how does community architecture plays a part in society, and how it actually creates social impacts? So yeah, would one like to go first?
I can try. It's a really difficult question in a way. I've thought about this, and I've been asked this. Like, I think it does play a positive part as a role model. Basically, like as a student, when you are learning how to design, and it's going to be a difficult. I'm going to try to summarize, but how is it impacting society? I think that on an ideal society, this kind of community should be. We wouldn't be classifying it as community architecture. It would be architecture, and it works like that. So the communities with less means, they would have a way to do it by themselves without needing the help of like a foreign agency, right? So in my opinion, again, we shouldn't exist if everything was perfect. So does it have a good impact? Yes. Should those remote communities depend on it? I don't think so. I think we can try to leave our seat, but not so much create dependence on it, right? And then how does it create an impact? I mean, it's quite, at least in the scale I've had the chance to work, it's quite direct. It's like there is no classroom, there is no space to gather, and after 2 months, 3 months of construction, you see people that now they can, as we were saying in Joshua, like maybe store books or just gather, or have class, even if it's super basic. So I think it's not an abstract topic. It's really a direct impact, and you can see it. But I just want to emphasize the fact that I think that in a perfect world, there would be not such thing as community architecture. Everything would be architecture, and we wouldn't specify like, oh, it's community project.
Yeah. So,
yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that the architecture shouldn't be something that's perceived as like, only accessible to people that can pay for it and have, the means for it. I think architecture should be accessible to everyone, anywhere. Like we said, our ethos is about ensuring that everyone has the tools and ability to shape their own spaces. I think that's really important. But I think also we definitely really believe that all architecture, no matter what, no matter if it's a skyscraper in London or a community hall in Vanuatu, should all, its main aim should always be to create a social, environmental, or economic positive impact, and that it doesn't need to be this mindset of in a developed country this project is purely commercial. That can have just as big a social impact as a project in a developing country, in a community. So I think that's one of our core beliefs.
Thank you. So, and do you agree that the gist of a community project lies within its after effect? So in terms of like, let's say, social impact rather than its process?
I mean, go on, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think that the process of a project is absolutely as important as the end outcome, from an impact point of view, and from a knowledge exchange and learning point of view. I think often architecture or humanitarian architecture, impact is always thought of as, oh, here's this wonderful end product building. Look at how many people can go to school there now. That's great, and that obviously is a great result of doing a project. But I think equally, there's so much importance on making sure that you create an impact during the process of a project, that it's as important, if not more important, than the end result.
Absolutely agree. I've seen a lot of, in that area that I'm basically specialized or I've been based on, I've seen a lot of projects run by big multinational organizations in which basically they have a result and they could claim that they have built 400 houses for displaced people, right? And then the reality, since there was no process, the reality is quite different. So I think on paper things could look quite different than the real result. And I think that, as I said, as I repeated many times, the process is crucial. I mean, without the process, I think it wouldn't really work that well after construction.
Thank you for your answer. So yeah, next. Okay, what do you think that makes architecture social? Like, what do you think that makes community architecture? Is it inclusiveness, influential, or playfulness, or any other qualities that you think that plays like the most important role in terms of community architecture?
I mean, I think that architecture in itself isn't necessarily social, but architecture and community buildings provide a place for socialization and for people to meet others and to enhance that experience. I think that's what architecture's role plays in that social interaction, as well as, obviously, as we've said before, using the process of construction of a building as a vehicle to bring people together and to be inclusive and to hopefully educate people and maybe change their lives through upskilling and future employability, etc. So yeah, I think architecture has a really important role to enhance the spaces that we occupy, to encourage social interaction and yeah, bring people together.
Thank you, Josh.
It's a tricky question because maybe I ask you now. Would you consider that the architecture designed by a totalitarian regime, like let's say in the USSR, they're building a brutalist building of 900 units? Could you consider that social? I mean, is socialist, but is that a social building or not?
So, all right, I guess that brings us to the end of our session today. So special thanks to our speaker, Joshua Peasley and Juan Cuevas Duran. Stay safe and see you again soon. Bye.